Hello and welcome. I'm Ellie Richardson and you're watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. Iran offers to help facilitate dialogue between Afghanistan and Pakistan after Islamabad declares open war on the Taliban and launches airstrikes on Kabul following border clashes. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says Tehran stands ready to assist talks to reduce tensions and promote cooperation between the two neighbours. Hillary Clinton tells a congressional panel she has no knowledge of Jeffrey Epstein's crimes and calls for President Donald Trump to testify under oath about his past association with the financier. She testifies behind closed doors as Bill Clinton prepares to appear after both agree to comply with a subpoena from the Epstein investigation, while all deny wrongdoing. The United States and Iran makes progress in talks over Tehran's nuclear program, Oman says, but end hours of negotiations without a breakthrough amid a massive US military buildup and threat of possible strikes. Mediator Oman confirms both sides will resume discussions after capital-level consultations, with technical talks set for next week in Vienna following meetings in Switzerland. Ukrainian and US officials meet in Geneva for post-war reconstruction talks despite a deadlock with Russia, as Kyiv seeks to finalise key settlements details at a trilateral meeting next month. Top negotiator Rustem Umerov says participants speak with President Volodymyr Zelensky after the session, which follows a night of Russia attacks and Ukrainian infrastructure. Netflix says it will not raise its takeover offer for Warner Brothers. Discovery effectively ceding the media giant to a rival bid from Paramount Skydance. The streaming company says the deal is no longer financially attractive after Warner Brothers Discovery's board declares Paramount Skydance's proposal superior under its existing merger terms. A US official says at least 2 Americans are on a speedboat fired upon by Cuba's Coast Guard, leaving 1 dead and another injured off the island's northern coast. 4 people are killed and 11 wounded in Wednesday's incident, with officials saying others on board include a US K-1 visa holder and possible legal permanent residents. Denmark will hold a parliamentary election on March the 24th. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen announces amid a surge in support after her stance against US pressure on Greenland. Frederiksen has rallied European leaders against Donald Trump's renewed interest in annexing the Arctic island, with polls suggesting the dispute boosts her popularity despite domestic cost of living concerns. Britain's ruling Labour Party loses a key Manchester by-election to the left-wing Greens, with official results dealing a fresh blow to Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Green candidate Hannah Spencer wins in Gorton and Denton with nearly 15,000 votes, as Labour falls to 3rd place behind Reform UK in one of its traditional strongholds. And for your top stories this hour, Canada is urging citizens to avoid all travel to Iran due to the high risk of civil unrest, arbitrary detention and the unpredictable enforcement of local laws. Canadians in Iran are advised to leave if safe to do so, although some airlines have suspended flights to and from Iran. Commercial flights and overland crossing options remain. Canadian passport holders don't require a visa to enter Turkey, but visa on arrival is necessary for Armenia. Canada cannot provide assistance in Iran due to the lack of resident government office. Citizens should ensure travel documents are up to date and be prepared to shelter if needed, as transportation to the border is not available. The Afghan Taliban has launched drone attacks against Pakistani targets, according to a Taliban spokesperson. However, Pakistan's anti-drone system successfully brought down all the drones with no damage to life reported, said Pakistan's information minister. Pakistani Taliban militants had initially attempted to use drones to target critical locations. Meanwhile, Turkish Foreign Minister has been in talks with diplomatic counterparts from Pakistan, Afghanistan, Qatar and Saudi Arabia, focusing the escalating conflict between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Meanwhile, Pakistani citizens have shared their views on the renewed clashes between Pakistan and Afghanistan, which have dominated headlines. One citizen called for a diplomatic approach, saying war is not the solution to any issue and it should be resolved through diplomacy. The violence, which included deadly border clashes, has sparked concern across both countries, with many expressing hope that peace talks can replace military escalation. Locals have urged leaders to prioritise diplomacy over conflict, particularly in the wake of the latest attacks that have cost many lives. Listen in.
मामले का हल नहीं है और इसको सफारतकारी के ज़रिए हमें हल करना चाहिए। अफ़गानिस्तान हमारा मुसलमान मुल्क है और हम कभी भी नहीं चाहेंगे उससे जंग हमारी हो, लेकिन अफ़गानिस्तान को भी इस बात का सोचना चाहिए कि अपनी वो बाउंड्रीज़ क्रॉस ना करे और एक लिमिट में रहे, क्योंकि पाकिस्तान कभी भी अपनी जो सॉवरेनिटी है उस पर सौदेबाजी कभी नहीं कर सकता।
पाकिस्तान बड़ी देर से सोच रहा था भाई अफ़गानिस्तान पे हम अटैक ना करें। जब हमारे वो आकर दुश्मनों को बातों पे क्या करते हैं, हमारे पे हमले किए, उन्होंने हमारी पाक फौज की चौकियों पे किए हैं, हमारे नौजवान शहीद किए। हमने बार बार उनको ये एक ही दफ़ा मैसेज दिया था भाई आप हमारे साथ नहीं करें, हमारे मुल्क के लिए नहीं करें, और रात को जैसे पाकिस्तान ने जवाब दिया और मेरे ख्याल से बहुत अच्छा जवाब दिया इसको।
पाकिस्तान की और अफ़गानिस्तान की जो वार है, देखिए हमने 40-45 साल अफ़गान ब्रदर को अपने पास पाकिस्तान में रखा, उनकी सारा कुछ, उनको खुराक हर चीज़ मुहैया की। इसके बावजूद भी अफ़गानिस्तान पर पाकिस्तान पर हमले होते हैं और ये अफ़गानिस्तान की गवर्नमेंट को चाहिए कि अपने अंदर के मामलात को सुलझाए और पाकिस्तान पे जो हमले हो रहे हैं उनको रोकने में पाकिस्तान की।
We are now being joined by Dr. Asta Chadha, who is an Associate Professor of International Relations for joining us from Japan. Thank you so much for joining us here today on NewsX World. Thank you. What domestic political pressures within Pakistan might be shaping the government's response to the clashes, and how are ordinary Pakistanis reacting to this escalation?
Right. I mean, just as the videos that you played just now, the things I could gather were that they feel it's a war, or it's a possible conflict between two Islamic nations that shouldn't happen. However, the contentious issue here remains at the political level and even at the military level, remains the unresolved border. Or the Durand line, which the Afghanistan's Taliban regime has never recognized as such. It has been for them yet another example of a colonial legacy passed down to them without being consulted in one way or another. So they do not recognize that line, which in effect, according to their interpretation, means that that area still belongs to Afghanistan under the current administration. As far as Pakistan is concerned, it might have its own interpretation of Durand line, and it does not want to give up its sovereignty. That's what can be very easily read from this. But if I go a little bit deeper into this issue, it is very, very critical on the political spectrum on both sides, because in Pakistan, for the longest time, the military has been seeking, after repeated failures with its conflicts with India, they have been seeking some sort of legitimacy in both in domestic politics as well as as a domestic agent of defending their sovereignty. So this conflict, and given the fact that Pakistan today stands militarily and even in terms of capabilities in a much better position than does Afghanistan, it is potentially easier for them to wage this war that they called. I mean, their defense minister, Khwaja Asif, openly declared an open war that wouldn't cease till this conflict is in some way solved. So this is a very clear line or change or shift in political stance of Pakistan after decades. For decades, Pakistan and Afghanistan have continued to have smaller skirmishes or smaller conflicts, but they have never really openly declared war on each other in the past few decades. So this is a new stance politically coming out of Pakistan. For Afghanistan, every single time the Taliban were in power, we did see the emboldening of this sort of a conflict or a cross-border conflict at some places wherein the Afghan fighters would then cross over into Pakistan or from their own post try and initiate an attack. So given this sort of a very very strange sort of a nexus that is building at both the political and the military level in both the countries, a lot is at stake. As far as people are concerned, I mean, remember, open declaration of war for both the countries that stand at an economically very, very fragile state is definitely not a good news. They would want both their governments to be very, in some way very responsible and very mature about it and handle it diplomatically. But we must also understand that the very claims of the number of casualties that have occurred on both sides might hold these two countries back from actually engaging only diplomatically without employing their military or defensive resources, which directly points towards the Pakistan defense minister's statement when he said we are now in an open war with Afghanistan. So I would hold that statement in very serious regard in terms of what is the future of this conflict.
And what impacts are these clashes and the accompanying government statements, such as, like you said, the warnings of such forceful retaliation, having on public opinion and also national security, Pakistan's relationship with Afghanistan, and what worldwide people are thinking, with leaders coming in and saying they're worried about what's going on?
Right. I mean, we did see when Taliban took over for the second time, when the US forces retracted. I mean, it was a sign of potentially yet another conflict at some point on the brink of occurring. So, I mean, this conflict between Pakistan and Afghanistan has been going on, like I said, for a long time. And the main factor here remains TTP, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, which is, according to Pakistan, an offshoot of Taliban, and according to Afghanistan, they have nothing to do with this Pakistan-based organization. And this is the organization that continues to fight for the non-recognition of Durand Line. As far as their international sort of mediation efforts, we have heard from Qatar, that had previously also mediated a ceasefire between these two countries. This was back in 2025, and looks like with the outbreak of this conflict, the signing or the ceasefire that was signed effectively stands failed. Then similarly, we heard of Turkey wanting to mediate this conflict and ensure that these two sides do not fight, or at least they can have an immediate ceasefire and then come to the discussion table. We don't see much progress on that either. And the third country, surprisingly, that is entering as a potential mediator is Iran. And Iran has, in some way volunteered to take up this issue with both of these countries that are very, very close to its own borders. And we must remember that there are going to be a lot of implications of this conflict, not just between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Of course, their economies, their sovereignty, and their political stability stands in question today, as does the capabilities of both the governments and both the militaries on both the sides. Everything stands in a question, but there are other fears that are equally important from a geopolitical perspective, and I would raise three very quickly. First, this whole idea of proxy warfare. For instance, Pakistan continues to accuse other nations of using Afghanistan as a proxy, against its own sovereignty. The second issue would be of spillover effects of militants. And I think from that perspective, for Pakistan, the stakes are higher, because if TTP is in some way able to still take control of even a smaller part of the land, there do exist other separatists within Pakistan's own territory, including the ISIS Khorasan, including the Baloch Liberation Army, who could potentially also find some room to operate. And then thirdly is the refugee crisis. And Pakistan has been a home to a lot of refugees from Afghanistan, but this would really put into question the kind of response Pakistan would have from this point onwards towards the Afghan refugees who are trying to, or who have escaped their nation for the longest time, and the refugee crisis that would spill over into the wider region, including into Iran or into India. So there is a lot at stake here, and I'm not even talking about the amount of investments that probably countries like China have in Pakistan should this conflict become any bigger than it is. So we are not hearing about any hardcore stance or about any proper planning that has taken shape in terms of bringing this conflict to a pause. However, we do hear from other regional partners or players who do want to intervene and make sure that this conflict can at least be seized in the short run.
Thank you so much, Dr. Astor, for joining us here today on NewsX World. Thank you. We have some breaking news for you now. Prime Minister Mark Carney has arrived in India today, aiming to rebuild ties with Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government. This visit follows escalating tensions over the Khalistan issue and diplomatic rows involving Canadian security claims. Carney's efforts seek to diversify trade away from the US, with both nations eager to forge stronger economic and strategic alliances. Carney and Modi will meet in New Delhi on March the 1st. And for some more breaking news, the US Department of State has authorized the departure of non-emergency government personnel and their families from Israel due to safety risks. This move comes after increased security incidents. The US Embassy may restrict or prohibit travel to certain areas of Israel, including the Old City of Jerusalem and the West Bank, without advance notice. US citizens are advised to leave Israel while commercial flights remain available. Meanwhile, personnel and family members may face restrictions on movement in certain locations, depending on the evolving security situation. And some more breaking news. The UN Rights Chief Volker Türk has called violence against women, including femicide, a global emergency, speaking at the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva. Türk said around 50,000 women and girls were killed in 2024, with the majority of the killings carried out by family members. He highlighted the horrific abuse exposed in cases like that of US predator Jeffrey Epstein. The UN has urged greater global attention and action to combat the escalating violence against women worldwide. Next up, Britain's Ministry of Defence is reviewing flight records after new files show Jeffrey Epstein's private jet landed at military bases. The UK police are looking into whether Epstein used London airports and others in central England for women trafficking. Authorities are now also considering if RAF bases like Marham and Northolt were used for the same purpose. Defence Minister John Healey has ordered a full review to uncover any relevant information about Epstein's crimes. We are now going to be joined by Dr. Satoru Nagao, who's a fellow Hudson Institute, joining us from Tokyo. Thank you so much for joining us here today on NewsX World. How might uncovering evidence of Epstein's private jets potentially landing at RAF bases change the scope or direction of the ongoing investigations into his activities and networks?
In this case, of course, the military base can keep the secret, that is true. But at the same time, this is very important aspect of this Epstein issue. Because why such kind of the big crime hasn't revealed more earlier? Because Epstein shows the power to the victims, and the victims worry about his power, and so that's why they do not escape to the police or something other government officials. For example, the Epstein use military base of the United Kingdom means that when the victims see this fact, they lost their will to inform the government official of the crime. So that's why this is very important, and the government should not do that. That is a very important aspect of this scandal, I think.
And what challenges and limitations do investigators face when reviewing decades-old military flight logs, and how might that affect public trust in the process?
But in this case, most of the crew or officials in the UK military base did not know this is a crime. But at the same time, it is true that they use the military base, so this is big scandal. And if the UK military officials did not realize this is a problem, that is a problem indeed. So that's why it could be the more bigger scandal in the Ministry of Defense of the United Kingdom. And at the same time, there is a high possibility that the UK military is not the only military to cooperate the Epstein crime. Intendedly or unintendedly is not the matter in this case, but anyway, it could happen.
Thank you so much, Dr. Satoru Nagao, for joining us here today on NewsX World. Thank you. We now have some more breaking news coming to you. A Russian drone strike has killed 2 people in a house in eastern Ukraine as Moscow's forces continue their push for more territory. The attack took place in the village of Pidysyne, northeastern of Kharkiv, where the house was completely destroyed. Emergency services shared images of firefighters battling flames from the burning structure. Rescue workers recovered the bodies of a man and woman from the rubble, with 1 additional person reported wounded. And some more breaking news. Iran lashes out at Israel for airstrikes on Lebanon. The spokesperson for the Iranian Foreign Ministry, Ismail Bakay, posted on X and strongly condemned the airstrikes by the Zionist regime on Lebanon. Airstrikes including in the Bekaa region, which resulted in the maritime doom and injury of civilians and caused damage to Lebanese infrastructure. He called for urgent action by the United Nations Security Council to fulfill its duty in maintaining international peace and security, referring to the continuous violations of Lebanon's national sovereignty and territorial integrity. The spokesperson described the ongoing silence and inaction of the UN Security Council in the face of the Zionist regime's law-breaking and crimes as catastrophic. He emphasized the direct responsibility of the US and France as guarantors of the ceasefire for the continuation of this situation. A local ceasefire has been implemented near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant in southeastern Ukraine to allow repairs to an external power line. The plant, Europe's largest, has been under Russian control since 2022 and relies on external power to cool its nuclear material and prevent a catastrophic incident. Russian officials stated that the power line is still operational, but repairs to the second line will take at least a week. Russian management claims that radiation levels remain normal. The issue of who held control of the plant is a key point in US-mediated peace talks set to resume in Geneva next month. There has been no immediate comment from Ukraine. We are now being joined by Ben Aris, who is a former Moscow bureau chief and worked for the Daily Telegraph. Thank you so much, Ben, for joining us here from London. Thank you for joining us here today on NewsX World. What does this establishment of this localised ceasefire to enable repairs at Europe's largest nuclear plant tell us about the current state of the Russia-Ukraine conflict and an international pressure for safety measures?
Thanks for having me, Ali. Well, Zaporizhzhia, as you said, is the biggest nuclear power station in Europe. And of course, since the winter began, Russia, Putin has launched a campaign to basically try and freeze Ukraine into submission by completing the destruction of Ukraine's energy sector in the midst of one of the coldest winters in decades. I think about 20% of the capacity is still functioning. Ukraine is heavily dependent on imports of power from its neighbors in the European Union. But within this, the nuclear power stations, I think there's 4 still functioning, although Zaporizhzhia itself, because it's been captured and is under Russian military control, has been shuttered. Nevertheless, the problem with the nuclear power stations is that obviously Russia has not been directly targeting the facilities themselves. It's been going for the substations and the grids that surround them and allow them to deliver power. But occasionally they get hit or damaged. And that presents a Chernobyl-like nightmare scenario of another nuclear meltdown that will I don't know, Russia would be condemned all over the world for doing that if it did it on purpose. It's not going there. And so when something like Zaporizhzhia gets damaged in the fighting, then it's in everybody's interest to hold a temporary ceasefire and repair it to make sure that the cores don't melt down. That's separate from the wider campaign that Russia is pursuing of taking out the energy in general. And so that campaign continues. The energy assets continue to be hit. But as you said, as it's been reported, Zaporizhzhia got hit. And so this is actually, I think, the second time this month that there's been a temporary ceasefire in order to do repairs.
Thank you so much, Ben, for joining us here today on NewsX World. Sorry, we have run out of time. We have some more breaking news. The UN rights chief Volker Türk has said on Friday that he was extremely alarmed at the risk of a regional escalation around Iran, which is facing repeated threats of US strikes. He said that he is extremely alarmed about the potential for regional military escalation and its impact on civilians, and he hopes that the voice of reason prevails while addressing the United Nations of Human Rights Council. China has rejected calls to join trilateral nuclear disarmament talks with Russia and the United States, labelling such demands as unfounded and unfeasible. The Chinese Foreign Ministry stated that expectations for China's participation in the nuclear dialogue at this time are both baseless and unfair. The US-Russian Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, known as the START Treaty, expired on February the 5th, 2026. Russia has announced that it no longer considers itself bound by the treaty's obligations and will take a responsible, deliberate approach in determining its next steps. The country's strategy will be shaped by a comprehensive analysis of US military strategy and the global strategic environment. Meanwhile, US officials, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, have argued that for arms control agreements to remain relevant in the 21st century, China must include in future talks. Pointing to China's growing nuclear capabilities, the White House has expressed expectations to develop a more effective arms control framework in the wake of the treaty's expiration. Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum has recently expressed gratitude to FIFA and its president Gianni Infantino for their support of Mexico's World Cup plans. She confirmed that the tournament's host cities will remain as originally scheduled, despite recent violence in Jalisco following the death of cartel leader Namensko Ruben Osadura Cervantes. According to reports, Mexico will host 13 World Cup matches, including 4 in Guadalajara, and will also stage warm-up games before the tournament kicks off on June 11th. Listen in.
Quiero darle las gracias a la FIFA, a Gianni Infantino, y en efecto ayer hizo la declaración de que hemos estado yo no personalmente, pero el equipo ha estado en contacto con él y pues explicándole que no hay ningún problema, y ayer dijo la sede es México, sus sedes son las que son y no hay ningún cambio.
Some more breaking news. The UN rights chief Volker Türk has said that Afghanistan has become a graveyard for human rights while addressing the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva. The UN rights chief said fundamental freedoms in Afghanistan have collapsed since the Taliban returned to power, with women and girls bearing the brunt of restrictions. He warned that bans on education, employment and public life amount to systematic discrimination and could constitute crimes under international law. Turk urged the international community not to normalise the situation, calling for accountability and sustained pressure to protect basic human rights in the country. That is all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.